Tonight's headlines: enough war. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has written an open letter to Putin. A meeting between the Ukrainian leader and the Russian dictator. According to the US president, they must do this. Non-stop shelling. The production of drones and missiles prevents Russia from building up large stockpiles. What has the Russian Federation managed to stockpile and in what quantities? A response to Russian terror. Unmanned Systems Forces attacked Russian tankers and cargo ships in the ports of Mariupol and Berdiansk and took fire control of Donetsk Airport. These and other topics in this edition. Hello, I'm Volodymyr Rabchun. This is Ukraine Today. Subscribe and like the video. Now, on to the news. Enough war. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has written an open letter to Putin. In it, Zelensky proposed that the Russian dictator set a clear date and meet to put an end to the bloodshed. According to the Ukrainian president, there are countries that traditionally host leaders to resolve issues of war and peace: Switzerland, Turkey, and the Arab world. Many are able and willing to do so. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha wrote that this is a serious and significant proposal to end the war. Ukraine will officially deliver the letter to the Russian Federation through diplomatic channels. By the way, the Kremlin has already seen this document, but more on that a bit later. US President Donald Trump stated that it would be wonderful if Zelensky and Putin were to meet. According to the head of the White House, they must do this. So, the end of the war is already very close. Our journalists have been looking for the answer to this question.
The war, which has remained the main challenge for Europe for several years, may be approaching a decisive stage. In diplomatic circles, there is growing talk of a possible meeting between Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin. And although there is no official confirmation yet, international activity around the Ukrainian issue has noticeably intensified.
As I said, for us, the #1 priority remains ending the war, and there is no alternative to that.
According to Western media, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom are working with Kyiv on a plan to push the Kremlin toward negotiations. In Europe, they believe that a so-called window of opportunity has now opened. Ukraine has strengthened its positions both on the battlefield and in the international arena, while Russia continues to suffer significant losses. At the same time, European leaders emphasize the decision on any negotiations will be made exclusively by Kyiv. No pressure should be exerted on the Ukrainian leadership. Volodymyr Zelensky himself has already stated that he is ready for a direct dialogue with Putin right now, if it helps stop the war. According to the president, Ukraine does not intend to wait for global players to deal with all international problems.
I have said frankly, we support any format, and I am ready for direct negotiations with Putin to end this war, rather than waiting in line for everyone to finish all the conflicts in the world before it gets to us.
Against this backdrop, a new report is emerging from Washington and Beijing. According to several sources, Donald Trump, during talks with Chinese leader Xi Jinping, asked him to use his influence on Moscow and help bring Russia back to the negotiating table. American mediation efforts, as US officials themselves admit, have effectively reached a dead end. Therefore, a new settlement format is being discussed more and more, with more active participation from European states and a possible shift to direct dialogue between Kyiv and Moscow.
I've always had a great relationship with Putin. I'm very disappointed. I've settled 8 wars. I thought this conflict would be somewhere in the middle of the list, or maybe one of the easy ones.
At the same time, Ukraine is demonstrating its readiness to continue putting pressure on Russia. Zelensky announced his intention to increase long-range strikes on Russian territory in response to the brutal missile and drone attacks.
He launched his Oreshnik at Bila Tserkva. They're truly unhinged. It's important that this doesn't go without consequences for Russia.
Kyiv is also actively expanding its own weapons production and strengthening international military cooperation. Today, the diplomatic struggle is running parallel to the fighting, but more and more signals indicate that the world's major players have begun looking for a path to a political end to the war. Will the near future be the moment when the parties finally sit down at the negotiating table? A question that now concerns not only Ukraine and Russia, but the entire world.
Putin's so-called press secretary Dmitry Peskov reported that the Kremlin has seen Zelensky's letter. Putin will be briefed on it later. And if Zelensky wants to meet, he can come to Moscow. Let's draw some conclusions. Putin receives information with a delay. Before reaching the dictator's bunker, the data undergoes processing and possibly censorship. This could explain the Kremlin war criminals' confidence in the successes of the occupying army. Furthermore, it can be concluded that Russia is not interested in a meeting between Zelensky and Putin, or for that matter, in ending the war. What a surprise! Otherwise, the obviously unacceptable proposal for a visit to Moscow would not have been made. This is seen in Kyiv, it's seen in Washington, and in other capitals as well. Russia demonstrates its true intentions through its actions. Russian terrorists struck the Kyiv region with drones. In the Brovary district, a dairy plant was hit, 4 people were killed, and as many were injured. In addition, the occupiers attacked a residential area in Zaporizhzhia. There are at least 10 casualties. But Russia's tools of terror are not infinite. The production of drones and missiles in Russia doesn't allow for large stockpiles. Almost everything is sent straight to the front. This was reported by Serhiy Bezkresnov, an advisor to Ukraine's Minister of Defense, #Flash. According to him, the production date can indirectly indicate the enemy's weapons stockpiles. Shaheds usually arrive brand new, manufactured 5 to 15 days ago, meaning straight off the assembly line. Iskander ballistic missiles from the 2025 production run. This could indicate that the enemy has 180 to 250 such missiles in stock. Zircons are arriving from the 2026 production year. K-101 missiles are most often dated a few months before launch. S-400, 2026, K-59, third quarter of 2025. The Kremlin is again threatening with its favorite toy, nuclear weapons. Rational countries need to protect themselves. Information is coming in about negotiations regarding the deployment of American nuclear weapons in Lithuania. Here are the details.
The worse things get in Moscow, the more often they bring up nukes. While the gas station country is increasingly consumed by fuel shortages and St. Petersburg is shrouded in black smoke from a burning oil terminal, the ideologues of the Russian world declare from the stage of an international conference that Russia views the use of nuclear weapons as a good scenario.
In a good scenario, a good one, we have a clear vision of victory in the ideological war based on forecasting and planning. We have the annexation of Kyiv, Odessa, Kharkiv, and so on. The collapse of the European Union, and by 2050, leadership in ensuring global security and justice. We don't consider the use of nuclear weapons an inertial scenario. We consider it a good one.
Sergei Ryabkov, Russia's deputy foreign minister, also urged taking the threat of a nuclear strike very seriously if the Kremlin is displeased with something. Moreover, Putin and company no longer hide that they could launch it in response to Ukraine deoccupying its own territory.
Besides the nuclear weapons you mentioned, there's also mobilization and drone and missile strikes on the Baltic states and possibly on Poland and Finland. These three options, I think he's currently weighing them and considering which one to use. We understand that all of them have pros and all of them have cons. At least in Putin's eyes, because naturally a normal person sees no pros in an attack or the use of nuclear weapons. But for Putin, there are some pros and some cons. I think he's now trying to weigh all the pros and cons and will likely make some kind of decision, because it's obvious that if the situation doesn't change radically, meaning if he doesn't use one of those three super weapons, his Wunderwaffe, then Russia will start losing this. And there's even this Z-War correspondent, Tulinkov, who recently wrote that Russia has already passed the stop where the war could have been halted at the line of contact, and now the next stop is Ukraine's return to its 1991 borders. In other words, he no longer believes that Russia will even be able to keep what it has captured during this war.
Minsk, which recently held its first joint strategic nuclear forces exercises with Russia, also stated that the threat of Belarus entering a war with the West alongside Russia is now incredibly high. Moreover, according to Defense Minister Krynin, the confrontation would immediately escalate to a global level.
Assessing the current situation in the Eastern European region, we state that the probability of a military conflict breaking out against the Russian Federation and the Republic of Belarus, both members of the CSTO, as well as the possibility of its subsequent transformation from regional to global, is extremely high. It's hard to imagine what the security situation within the organization's space would be like if our countries hadn't maintained close cooperation and developed it in accordance with the changing environment.
At the same time, the Belarusian Ministry of Defense chose a statement from its patron as its main quote, where he says the Republic's army is not only ready for modern challenges, but also wishes to become a driving force in forming a new international security architecture, for which there is a growing demand in Eurasia. Belarusians have become quite bold after the alleged deployment of the Oreshnik on the Republic's territory. But analysts note they're unlikely to be allowed to press the button in Moscow, which is where the final decision will be made. More likely is a strike on the Chernobyl nuclear plant, which is near the border, or turning Belarus into a drone launch site.
Providing Belarusian territory for drone attacks, this could be like the final stage, to try and break the will of Ukrainians and break the will of Europeans. The Institute for the Study of War actually writes about this, saying that such a scenario is also possible. This is what Lukashenko is afraid of, by the way. That's why he's been saying for months, we're preparing for war. Belarus will become a theater of military operations. God grant we avoid war. He told his own officers that you'll be dying. I won't run ahead of you. I'll be running behind. Yeah. You think he says, I'll run ahead of you? No, I won't. He says, we'll win, we'll run ahead. Yeah. He's promising them apartments there. Well, he says it straight. Well, at least an apartment will remain after death. Well, Lukashenko is really preparing both the army psychologically and society for events, well, maybe even such tragic, bad ones.
However, where an attack from Belarusian territory will be directed is the question. It's convenient to strike not only Ukraine, but also European Union countries. The most vulnerable are the Baltic ones. It will be difficult for the well-armed but small Baltic forces to resist the Armada, so they seek protection in the deployment of United States nuclear weapons. Such plans were confirmed to journalists by the Lithuanian Defense Minister, Rabiotas Konas.
Discussions are indeed underway. I don't want to go into details right now because they are classified. But negotiations are continuing, and Lithuania, of course, is not staying on the sidelines.
This statement by the minister comes amid reports that the United States is withdrawing its contingent of 1,000 troops and equipment from the country. The authorities claim they received a signal from Washington there will be a next rotation. However, when and how many United States troops will reinforce NATO's eastern flank is unknown even in Vilnius.
It's high time to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it. Please do it right now. Thank you. And glory to Ukraine. Ukraine is responding to Russian terror. The Unmanned Systems Forces attacked Russian tankers and cargo ships in the ports of Mariupol and Berdiansk, as well as in the coastal waters of the temporarily occupied territories. The occupiers used these vessels to steal Ukrainian grain and transport military cargo and fuel. In addition, drones visited temporarily occupied Luhansk. Information is coming in about a large-scale fire at a local oil depot. And also the Donetsk Airport is now under the fire control of the Unmanned Systems Forces. The invaders turned this facility into a military logistics hub and a key site for launching Shaheds. In turn, the Ukrainian military has made the operation of the airfield impossible. Over the past 24 hours, Russia has lost at least 1,550 invaders killed and wounded. Thus, since the start of the full-scale invasion, that is already 1,370,890 occupiers. In addition, over the last 24 hours, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed 2 Russian tanks, 8 armored combat vehicles, 68 artillery systems, and dozens of other pieces of Russian military equipment. A video has emerged clearly showing the aftermath of a Ukrainian strike on the corvette Boyki in Kronstadt. I hope the Russian swearing was bleeped out in time. If not, I apologize in advance.
This is just a total disaster. We're screwed.
Well put. As the visit of Ukrainian drones to St. Petersburg and Kronstadt showed, the Russian Federation's air defense is unable to handle even Ukrainian UAVs. What then can be said about Ukrainian ballistics?
Moscow is not ready for the trials heading its way. Ukrainian ballistics will take flight as early as this summer.
I expect that this summer or at the latest early autumn, we will begin test flights to Moscow. And since we never wait for authorization or identification, we build production lines immediately. So we never make just 1 or 2 copies or 3. We immediately make, say, 10.
Currently, Firepoint is simultaneously developing 2 ballistic missiles, the FP7 and the FP9. The main difference between the missiles is the size of the warhead and the strike range. Being on the home stretch, the developers changed the concept of one of the missiles. From the short-range ballistic FP7, they decided to make the anti-aircraft anti-ballistic FP7X.
The FP7 and FP7X missiles differ only in their guidance systems. In the FP7X system, which is for the Freya anti-aircraft missile complex, a project currently unfolding in Europe, it essentially only needs a homing head.
For strikes on Moscow and other Russian cities, Ukraine will soon have the FP9. The missile's stated range is up to 900 kilometers, with a warhead weight of 800 kilograms. The main advantage of Ukrainian ballistics is the cost. Minimal investment should ensure maximum benefit.
After all, an impact of 800 kilograms of explosives on any industrial facility means its destruction, not just damage. The entirety of Moscow and its surroundings falls completely within the strike zone. It enters the strike zone. This means that all enterprises in the Moscow region that produce missiles, that design missile technology, that produce both cruise and ballistic missiles in this area, yes, or design ballistic missiles, produce electronics for them, produce UMPC units. All these enterprises will be primary targets.
Preparing for another harsh winter, Kyiv is betting on two antidotes to Russian shelling of civilian infrastructure. The FP-7X anti-ballistic missile should bolster Ukraine's air defense, while the long-range FP-9 allows for a reciprocal response against Moscow's infrastructure and other cities.
To strike some key and truly iconic targets in Moscow and then to trade it. Basically, you do not hit our civilian infrastructure, and in return, we will not hit your infrastructure. And let's just fight calmly using conventional methods.
An extra ace up Ukraine's sleeve is Russia's shortage of air defense systems. Ukrainian birds rule the Russian skies, drones destroy dozens of oil refineries, and missiles hit factories deep in the rear. Meanwhile, hundreds of Russian surface-to-air missile systems have burned at the front, and the lion's share of the remaining systems protect Moscow, as well as Putin's dachas, residences, and bunkers.
If ballistic missiles fly toward Volgograd, all the surrounding regions, St. Petersburg, all those factories, even toward Taganrog and yes, Rostov, all of that will be flying there. The Taganrog aviation plant is the prime candidate to receive a round of missiles. So in Moscow, they'll more or less manage to handle it. I don't think our first strikes will be aimed at Moscow, right? We'll get our range first.
Mass production of Ukrainian ballistic missiles will strip the Kremlin of its last advantage in the war with Ukraine. Kyiv will be able to hit Iskander launchers and respond in kind to the energy terror against civilians.
Returning to the topic of strikes on St. Petersburg on the opening day of the Economic Forum, there's a whole detective story there. The Kremlin claims that Washington sent its official representatives to this event, the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. In turn, Secretary of State Rubio says he hasn't heard anything about it. More on this and other interesting stories from the SPIEF in the report.
This isn't a Maslenitsa celebration in Russia. It's a serious, as they say, economic forum in St. Petersburg.
Friends, I'm here at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. I noticed there are definitely no prostitutes here, but Ksenia Sobchak is.
Taking a ride on a Russian troika at the SPIEF venue. This year, that's an option too. It's all very traditional. The exhibition wouldn't be complete without Matryoshka dolls either.
Daddy will come and pick you up now, Vladimirovich. Sorry.
And Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov threatened the use of nuclear weapons in the event of worst-case scenarios and threats to the country's territorial integrity.
We will respond using these means. This is a warning, this is a signal. It must be taken as seriously as possible.
The forum itself began on June 3rd. At that time, front pages everywhere reported that the largest oil transshipment complex in northwest Russia, the Petersburg oil terminal, was ablaze. Oh my God. They brought diamond. Smoke was visible from various parts of the city, including from the Expo Forum. But no one intended to cancel the SPIEF Forum. Everyone pretended there was no alarm and no drones were flying. And St. Petersburg itself experienced yet another round of mobile internet outages. As always, they said it was all for the sake of security. Of course, militants and collaborators from the occupied regions of Ukraine arrived in the city. SVO veterans were planting trees, this time in honor of the Year of Unity of the Peoples of Russia, proving once again that Russia is an occupying country.
Thank you very much.
Guests were offered a cocktail in honor of Epstein Island. There's a whole menu with a long Epstein Island cocktail, an Oreshnik dessert, and European-style still water. That's the joke. Bumble, Sunset of Europe, Zhirinovsky's Prediction, and other cringe. Propagandist Simonian considers this menu to be magnificent. That's what she wrote on her Telegram. This year, lunch at the forum's restaurant cost guests and participants nearly 8,000 rubles, whereas just a year ago, it was 5,600. By the way, the new primary car for Russian officials was unveiled at SPIEF, though only a single prototype exists. The supposedly budget-friendly RS Senat 900 turned out to be a copy of the Chinese honky H9. Moreover, for Putin's import-substituted Rolls-Royce, Russians are asked to pay 10 to 12 million rubles, while the Chinese version can be bought for 4 million. And if you want something cheaper, here's another China mobile, the Geely Monjaro, which was passed off as the new Volga. They slapped on some badges and thought they could pull the wool over everyone's eyes.
Friends, this is a Volga. I thought I was seeing things, but no, it's a Volga. Can you imagine? Look at how it looks. Volga! Nice interior, wow! Volga.
SPIEF is the only event currently held in Russia with foreign guests, though the selection of them is quite questionable.
Why isn't he in prison yet? If the president tasks me, I'll restore order with an iron fist. I'll send all these scumbags away. You'll be assembling cannons.
Putin supporter Steven Seagal also arrived at SPIEF. The former actor has gained quite a bit of weight. Russia clearly doesn't suit him. There was even an American at the forum. However, Rubio denied the Kremlin's claim about a US delegation visiting St. Petersburg.
For the first time since 2018, an official, and I emphasize an official, representative of the United States of America has flown to St. Petersburg for the forum. This is...
That very official American, Rodney Mims Cook Jr., caused an unprecedented stir among Russian journalists, but he flatly refused to speak with the press. Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tanzania. Look at the unprecedented interest in the African stand as Russians are waiting for the visa regime to be abolished, though not with Europe, but with Africa. SPIEF simply amazed everyone with its innovations. Count for yourself how many times it fell. All right, ready.
All right, ready.
This robot somewhat resembles Russia under Putin in 2026, trying to get up from its knees, but the massive budget hole is already visible even from space. Because of this, the head of the Bank of Russia, Nabiullina, decided not to go to the forum, claiming she was unwell.
Today, unfortunately, we are an all-male group. Believe me, Elvira Sakipsadovna has objective reasons why she was unable to participate.
And it only gets worse from here. The deficit and war spending are destroying Russia. However, Finance Minister Anton Siluanov pretends that everything is under control. He's not doing a very good job of it.
Taxes are rising after all. And there were risks that we might overstep the mark somewhere.
They also confirm that labor market opportunities are very scarce and the quality of jobs is suffering. But they will try once again to resurrect the economy.
In the absence of great quantitative opportunities in the labor market, there are many qualitative opportunities there. Improving the quality of jobs and the efficiency of labor returns is exactly what Elvira Sakipsadovna, who is not with us today, was talking about. But I completely agree with her that it is precisely the growth of labor productivity.
The Kremlin expects that the main part of Putin's speech at SPIEF will be dedicated to the economy. But as we can see, the conversation will be quite interesting, as this forum proves once again that things are going poorly for Russia, not only at the front.
That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Strength to the Ukrainian defenders, men and women. Glory to Ukraine. Subscribe to the channel, like, comment and share this video. And see you soon.